Hello, Year 12. This is another video about Buddhist teachings on Samsara, and this is another one where we're going to look at an essay topic. The essay topic we looked at before was whether the best way to interpret teachings about Samsara are is metaphors for psychological truths rather than as something literal. This is about another topic which is specifically on the specification, so it definitely could come up. It says teachings about samsara are not important in everyday Buddhist practice. So basically, regardless of whether we accept them as true or not true, are they even very important to Buddhists? Are they important to the everyday life of Buddhists? Now, you should have a worksheet for this, which I'm going to attach to Teams. If you can print it off, I would usually print this on A3, but it doesn't really matter because you can fill it in on A4, and then you can just put, if you needed to put extra stuff, you can just put it on the back or somewhere else. But what I want you to do is to fill in that worksheet. We're going to go through it, and then I want you to do what I've asked you to do loads of times recently. I'm sorry about this, but it is the best way to prepare for doing essays is good, obviously, but if you can do lots of plans of essays and then do a peril for them, that means that you're not just getting good in one topic. It means you've got plans for whatever essay would come up. That's why we're asking to plan essays. So at the end, once we've gone through the worksheet, I'm going to ask you to plan an essay and do the plan, and then send and do a peril for it, just one of the perils. So what the worksheet does is it divides into arguments for and against this statement. So reasons to say, to agree that they're not very important, those teachings about samsara, and then reasons to say that they are important. And of course, when I say teaching about samsara, I'm really talking about karma and rebirth principally, but dependent origination, the 6 realms of rebirth. And really, it's karma and rebirth. How important are karma and rebirth in Buddhism? So what I'm going to do is go through each point. What you need to do is explain the point underneath where it says the point, and then see if you can respond to the point. Is there a way you could respond to it? Now, what would be good to do is take a little bit of time to see if you can fill the sheet in yourself. How much can you do yourself? And so pause the video at this point, try and fill it in yourself, see how much you could understand, and then come back to the video and fill in anything you've missed. Or what you could do is just do it one point at a time. So take the first box, try and fill that in, then watch the video. Then do the second box, try and fill that in, then watch the video. It's good if you can have a go yourself because it gets you thinking rather than just copying out what's on the video. But yeah, so there we go. Right, so I'm going to go through the first one. So this is a reason to agree. It says the real goal of Buddhism. Well, what is the real goal of Buddhism? Well, the real goal of Buddhism is nirvana. And it could be argued that getting to nirvana is not something that is completely linked to teachings about samsara. Why is that? Well, what I mean by that is that if you look at the Four Noble Truths, which is the Buddha's most, first teaching and most important teaching, what's it about? It's about suffering. It's about how we suffer, and the cause of suffering is craving. And that if we want to get rid of craving, we have to if we want to get rid of suffering, we want to get rid of craving, and that means following the Eightfold Path and rooting out all greed, hatred, and ignorance. Well, all of those things seem to me things that you could do or try to do without any thought about karma or rebirth. If you look at the Eightfold Path, nothing in there is we can come back to this maybe later, but nothing is principally about rebirth and karma. It's all about viewing the world in the right way. It's about right action. It's about meditation. So you could say, if you want to get to the goal of Buddhism is nirvana, what do you need to do to get to nirvana? Follow the Eightfold Path. You need to meditate. You need to be an ethically good person. You could just ignore karma and rebirth to try and do that. That's the idea. How could you respond to that? Well, there's quite a few ways you can respond. One, you could say, well, hold on, but the point is, if you want to get to nirvana, what if you don't get there in this life? And probably most of us won't get there in this life. So surely you need to think about karma and rebirth. You have to at least make enough merit so that you get a good rebirth in your next life, and you can carry on trying to get to nirvana then. You could say, and we'll look at this later, that maybe the whole idea of nirvana only really makes sense in the context of karma and rebirth. You only will want to get to nirvana if you really believe that human beings are reborn again and again and again, and we're trapped in samsara. Like nirvana is all about escaping from samsara. So maybe the whole idea of wanting nirvana only makes sense if you believe in and think about teachings of samsara. Another thing you could say, loads of responses to this you could make. You could say, well, hold on, actually, right view is part of the Eightfold Path. And right view in most traditional Buddhist understandings involves believing in karma and rebirth. So in a way, understanding karma and rebirth is part of the path to nirvana. Finally, you could say, well, hold on, maybe the real goal of Buddhism is nirvana, but Melford Spiro found out that actually the majority of Buddhists don't try to get to nirvana, they're trying to get a good rebirth. And remember, they look at the question, it's about, is it important in everyday Buddhist practice? Well, Melford Spiro found that whatever the Buddha taught, everyday Buddhist practice is more focused on making merit, and therefore is very concerned with teachings about samsara. So lots of different responses there. Okay, here's another one. In reason to agree, Buddhism is not dogmatic. Here you want to talk about the Kalama Sutta. You know, the Buddha said that not to believe things just because they're in holy scriptures or just because a famous teacher said them. That's what he says in the Kalama Sutta, that you need to put things into practice and find out if you are if they work for you. Now this is a bit tricky, this one, to link to the question, because the question isn't do Buddhists have to believe in samsara, it's are they important in everyday Buddhist practice. But I suppose the way you could do it is to say, well, Buddhism is not dogmatic, and because it's not dogmatic, many Buddhists find it possible to practice Buddhism without any reference to these teachings, because they feel that the teachings of the Kalama Sutra has given them permission to not believe in them. That's how I would link it to the question. So if you use this one, you've got to be careful to make sure you're linking it to the question. How would you respond? Well, you would probably use what Gombrich and Bhikkhu Bodhi say about the Kalama Sutra and say, well, actually the Buddha wasn't saying you can believe whatever you want. The Buddha was actually saying, put things into practice and you'll find out that my teachings are actually true. So from that point of view, you could say, yes, Buddhism, it might be that these people have misunderstood what the Buddha said, and therefore they're living their life without teachings of karma and rebirth being important. But in doing that, they go against what the Buddha really taught. So you could say it's debatable whether they're really practicing Buddhism, because the Buddha didn't say you could just throw away teachings like that. And again, you could link it back to Karmatic Buddhism and say, yes, okay, maybe the Buddha gave the possibility that you could reject the teachings of karma and rebirth. But if we're talking about everyday Buddhist practice, in most Buddhist countries, feeding monks and making merit are more important than meditation and other stuff. So they are important. You do not need to believe in karma and rebirth to benefit from Buddhist practice. Again, this would be we'd link this to the Kalama Sutra again, but we'd link it to a different part of the Kalama Sutra, and we'd link it to that part in the Kalama Sutra where the Buddha says, these are the benefits of my practice, and one of them he says, even if there's no hereafter, there's no rebirth, and there's no karma, there's no results of our actions, good or bad, you can still benefit and be happy from following his teachings. So the idea there would be that, what am I saying? You can still benefit from his teachings. So that the idea would be that has shown that the Buddha himself believed that you didn't need to believe in karma and rebirth to have a happy life based on his teachings. You could link that to the fact that there are many Buddhists who have put this into practice, like Stephen Batchelor. He clearly believes that he's a Buddhist. He clearly believes that he has benefited a lot from the teachings of Buddhism, and yet he doesn't believe in karma and rebirth, so obviously the teachings of samsara are not important in his everyday life. How would you argue against that? Well, there are you could go back to the idea that right view is important in the path to nirvana. So really, to actually benefit properly from Buddhist practice, in other words, to get to nirvana, you do have to believe karma and rebirth. Based on that, you might say, well, how doesn't that contradict what the Kalama Sutta said? But you could make some argument like this. You could say something like, well, maybe right view is needed to get to nirvana. Maybe what the Buddha was saying is that if you put my teachings into practice, even if there's no karma and rebirth, you'll kind of have a happy life here and now. Maybe he wasn't talking about something as amazing as nirvana. Perhaps he was just saying, well, you'll be reasonably happy because you won't have done anything bad and you'll be a nice person. Everyone will like you. Maybe Buddhists might say, yes, the Buddha thought that you'd get a happy life, you'd be calm, happy, peaceful in this life if you follow his teachings, if you don't believe in karma and rebirth. But maybe to get the full benefits of those teachings, you need to believe in karma and rebirth. So you might say, if linking it back to the question, you might say, okay, the Buddha said that you can benefit from his teachings and get a good life out of them, and obviously some secular Buddhists do without believing in karma and rebirth. But it might be that a Buddhist who is trying to get to nirvana really needs to believe in those teachings, because believing in those teachings is a part of the Eightfold Path, and it's only through following the Eightfold Path that you can get to nirvana. So for that Buddhist, then it would be an important part of his life to believe in the Eightfold Path, to believe in karma and rebirth. Hope that makes sense. Okay, we're on to the reasons to disagree. So we could say Karmic Buddhism, we could say, part of everyday Buddhist practice, we could say, well, hold on, for Karmic Buddhists, making merit, trying to get to a good realm of rebirth, karma, all that stuff is vitally important. That's what their whole religion is based on. That's why they're feeding monks and making merit and transferring merit to their deceased loved ones. How could you criticize it? Well, you could have to go back to what the real goal of Buddhism is. You could say, okay, maybe Malthus Spira has proved that for many Buddhists living in the real world, it is important to teach in karma and rebirth. But I suppose it brings back to, you can kind of question the question a bit, that say, well, it might be important, those teachings might be important to the everyday practice of many Buddhists, but if we mean by everyday Buddhist practice the things that the Buddha wanted you to do every day, the ideals that the Buddha had for you, then maybe it's not that important, because the Buddha didn't want people to be Karmic Buddhists. The Buddha didn't even have that as a label. That's something Malthus Spira made up. The Buddha wanted you to get to nirvana. So that's a good debate, but between like the idea that the main goal is nirvana and the idea of Karmic Buddhism, because you could say, depending on how you interpret the question, if you interpret the question to mean what Buddhists actually do in everyday practice, then maybe most Buddhists are Karmic Buddhists, and therefore teachings of samsara are important. But if you're going to say everyday Buddhist practice to mean the way in which Buddhists ought to practice according to the way according to the Buddha's teachings, then teachings of samsara might not be so important, because you could be focusing more on nirvana. Okay, without samsara, there is no motivation to be ethical. So here you could say, look, it's important in everyday life. This is one that you'd have to be careful how you link it to the question. But the point here would be, it's important in everyday Buddhist practice because it motivates everyday Buddhist ethics. Buddhists are good people on an everyday level, and they do good actions based on the teachings of karma and rebirth, because they believe that if they do good actions, they'll be rewarded in the next life. If they do bad actions, they'll be punished in the next life. All that stuff. So that would make you think, yes, it's important because it motivates ethical action. However, on the other side of things, you could say that you can make what's it called? Stephen Batchelor's comment. Stephen Batchelor would be saying, actually, in the Western world, we've found out that you don't need, since the Enlightenment, we've found that because lots of people are atheists, you don't have to have a belief in an afterlife and reward and punishment to have ethical motivation. So that would suggest that you don't need to have ethical motivation. If we link it back to everyday Buddhist practice, well, there must be lots of ethical secular Buddhists out there who are not being motivated by teachings about samsara, by karma and rebirth. Even if we bring it back to traditional Buddhists, we might say, well, actually, traditional Buddhists have got every reason to believe in good actions, even if they don't, even outside of karma and rebirth, because good action is part of the Eightfold Path. Right action and right speech and right livelihood. So being ethical has a motivation beyond karma and rebirth in traditional Buddhism, and that is because it helps you on the path to nirvana. So there is a motivation to be a good person outside of karma and rebirth in Buddhism. Okay, karmic merit needed for nibbana. So this is a point I made before earlier on, which is to say that if you're saying that the goal of Buddhism is nirvana, a traditional Buddhist might say, yes, okay, the goal of Buddhism is nirvana, not to get a good rebirth, but you've got to have a backup plan, an insurance policy, because you are not very likely to get to nirvana in this life. Most people don't seem to get to nirvana straight away in this life. So you need to make sure that you've made enough merit, karmic merit, to ensure that you are going to get a good rebirth in your next life. That means you get a rebirth as preferably a human, living in a place that is calm and peaceful, and that as a result of that you are able to carry on the path to nirvana in your next life. So that means merit making, believing in karma and rebirth are important. How do you respond to that? Well, I'm not sure. I mean, the response might be, someone like Stephen Batchelor might say, even if you don't get to nirvana in this life, the point is that you're trying to make yourself as happy and as following the path to nirvana. If you get anywhere along that path, you'll have made yourself happier in this life than the next life. So you don't really need to think about the next life. From Stephen Batchelor's point of view, he might say, well, actually, I don't believe that there is a next life, so I still don't think it's important to make merit. I just think that it doesn't really matter if you get to nirvana in this life. It's more that by practicing Buddhism, you will get yourself as near to nirvana and as close to a feeling of as close to a condition of free from greed, hatred, and ignorance as you can get, and that will be the happiest life you can live. Personally, I would probably use this as a response to one of the points on the other side rather than the way around. Next, if there was no rebirth, would people want nirvana? This is a tricky point, but it was one that came up in the lesson before, our last lesson. The idea here is that if the motivation to want nirvana is based on the idea of karma and rebirth. In other words, if there was no karma and rebirth, there wouldn't be this strong motivation to want to meditate and practice the Eightfold Path, because you would just think, well, okay, I'm not free from suffering now, but then when I die, that'll be it. There'll be no karma or rebirth, and I'll just be free from suffering then. So why do I need to kind of do all this stuff to get free from suffering? From a traditional Buddhist point of view, the idea is that you're constantly in this loop of samsara, of reborn and again and again and again, and suffering never ends. But if you don't believe in karma and rebirth, then you're going to believe that your suffering will just end when you die. And so the motivation to really want to put all your effort into getting to nirvana seems to be lost if you don't believe in rebirth. How could you respond to this? Well, someone like Stephen Batchelor would probably say that actually the motivation isn't to get away from the cycle of rebirth. The motivation is just to have a happy life here and now. And actually what the Buddha taught was that we're suffering here and now, and it's in this present life that we can get happier through practicing Buddhism. We're not, that the main motivation is to escape from your suffering here and now, not the general idea of escaping from karma and rebirth. And you might say, oh, well, but we'll be free from suffering when we die. But he said, well, but his idea would be, well, but why can't we try and live our life here in this world with as little suffering as possible? And so he would say, as long as you agree that there's suffering in life, you've got every motivation to want to get to nirvana, even if you don't believe in karma and rebirth. So those are all the points. I hope they made sense. So you need to try and formulate them into some kind of plan. So this is where I'm kind of giving the initiative to you a little bit to kind of come up with 3 perils. If I was doing an introduction to this essay, I'd always link it back to secular Buddhism to say, basically, secular Buddhists are Buddhists who have taken the teachings out of samsara, taken those teachings about samsara out of Buddhism. And they've kind of tried to say that we don't need them, and you can have Buddhism without those teachings. or I mean, obviously they do sometimes use them and reinterpret them, but at least they want to get rid of them in a literal sense. And so when we're looking at the implications of this essay, we're really looking at, does that work? Does the idea of a Buddhism without karma and rebirth work, or is karma and rebirth somehow so central to Buddhism that you can't get rid of them? So you've got to try and think of 3 perils that you can use in that way. I would definitely do one on Karmic Buddhism and talking about, well, Karmic, a lot of Buddhists seem to be Karmic Buddhists. Doesn't this mean that Samsara, karma and rebirth are central to Buddhist life? That would definitely be one place, that direction where I would go. I would talk about the Kalama Sutra, especially the second thing in the Kalama Sutra, the thing that says, Buddhists suggest that secular Buddhists would say that the Buddha himself taught that you don't need karma and rebirth to benefit from the Buddha's teachings. You can benefit in your life here and now, and then respond to that. So that'd probably be the second direction I would go. And then the thirdly, I might go in the direction of ethics. So that's the way I might do it. It's up to you how you do it, but I might do it like that. I might do, Karmic Buddhists, they seem to prove that it is important in everyday life, but then isn't the goal of Buddhism supposed to be nirvana and not karma and rebirth? So really, shouldn't it be not that important? And then in your evaluation there, you might be able to link in the point and say, but even if you want to get to nirvana, don't you need a good rebirth in your next life in case you don't get to nirvana now? So that would mean it still is important. The second point, I would say, the Kalama Sutta says that you can benefit from Buddhist teachings even if you don't believe in karma and rebirth. But then as my response, I might say, yes, that's definitely true. You can benefit from them, but that doesn't quite mean that they're not important parts of the teaching, because right view is an important part of the Eightfold Path, and that means believing in karma and rebirth. So you might say, yes, it's true that you can follow the Buddha's teachings and get some benefits out of them without believing in karma and rebirth, but you really have to believe in them to get the full benefit of nirvana. So they are important in everyday life because they're part of the Eightfold Path. And then you might go for this thing about ethics and say, well, you need them because they motivate Buddhist ethics. And I think the responses are quite strong there, because you can say, well, Stephen Baxter's got a good point that actually it doesn't seem like you need to believe in karma and rebirth to have an ethical basis for your life. And also, there's another reason within Buddhist teachings for believing in karma and rebirth, and that is for believing in ethics, and that's because they're part of the Eightfold Path to Nirvana. So I would say, from that point of view, that point isn't a convincing reason why teaching about samsara are important. But if we go back to my first two, they both suggest that yes, actually, in reality, in everyday life, teachings of karma and rebirth are important to Buddhists, because one, part of the Eightfold Path is believing in right view, and right view includes karma and rebirth. And number two, even if nirvana is supposed to be your goal and not a good rebirth, from a traditional Buddhist point of view, you need to make sure that if you're not getting to nirvana in this life, then you're getting a good rebirth. So making some merit is necessary so that you get a good rebirth in your next life, so you can continue to nirvana. I feel I kind of waffled on and on in this video. This is the sort of thing that's much easier to do in a lesson. But see what you can do. Try and plan your essay out. See if you can write one peril. Well done for all your hard work. Thank you very much, guys.